In 1909, two men working under the Smithsonian Institution walked into a cave in the north wall of the Grand Canyon, and they found something inside. What they found, they removed secretly, and what they removed, they shipped east in as much secrecy.
What they shipped east, the institution that funded the expedition, now says never existed. The men did not exist. The cave did not exist. The artifacts did not exist. The article describing the find was a hoax. There are no records. There were never any records. The article ran on the front page of the Arizona Gazette on April 5th, 1909. 9 paragraphs, specific names, specific dates, specific descriptions of what was inside the cave, chambers cut into solid rock, mummified remains laid out in rows, copper tools, hieroglyphics carved into stone tablets, a seated idol holding a lotus flower in each hand. The lead explorer's name was Kincaid. His Smithsonian supervisor was Professor S.A. Jordan. The Smithsonian has spent the last 117 years saying neither man ever worked for them. What the Smithsonian does not say, what their official statement carefully avoids saying, is that two men with those names did exist. Trevor Kincaid was a real University of Washington zoologist with documented Smithsonian connections. David Starr Jordan was a real Smithsonian-affiliated naturalist who was offered the top job at the institution in 1906. The two men worked together on a Smithsonian expedition to Alaska in 1899. Trevor Kincaid's federal credential authorizing his next assignment is dated April 7th, 1909. 2 days after the Arizona Gazette article ran, the Hopi people, whose ancestral land sits at the eastern edge of that canyon, have been telling outsiders since before Europeans arrived in North America that there is a place under the rock where their ancestors emerged from a previous world. They call it the Sipapu. The Park Service has restricted public access to that area since the early 20th century. The restrictions are current. The restrictions are real.
But before I get into this, I've spent weeks on this case, and I need to set the scene before we get into the strangeness of all of this. And also, make sure you are subscribed. It helps us immensely. Thank you.
April of 1909. The town of Phoenix, in what is then still Arizona Territory. Statehood is 3 years away. The Arizona Gazette is one of 2 daily papers in town, competing with the Arizona Republican for the morning desk of every prospector, rancher, and rail worker passing through. The paper has 30,000 subscribers on a good week. The press runs hot in the back of a brick building on Adams Street. The editors do not have a wire service contract worth the name. They live on whatever walks through the door. On the morning of Sunday, April 4th, 1909, something walked through the door. A man identifying himself as G.E. Kincaid arrived at the Gazette's offices. He told the editor he had a story. He said he had been working under the direction of Professor S.A. Jordan, a Smithsonian archaeologist, on an expedition inside the Grand Canyon. He said the expedition had been ongoing for several months. He said the discoveries they had made would, in the words the editor would print the next morning, link Egypt and the Nile with Arizona and the Colorado in a historical chain running back to ages, which staggers the wildest fancy of the fictionist. He had notes, he had drawings, he had a story that ran 9 paragraphs. The editor put it on the front page. Headline: Explorations in Grand Canyon. Date: Monday, April 5th, 1909. The article opened with Kincaid's own account of how he had found the cave. He had been traveling down the Colorado River alone in a small boat. He was looking for minerals. The Grand Canyon in 1909 was a known source of copper, silver, and a number of less famous metals. President Theodore Roosevelt had declared the canyon a national monument the year before, but the federal protection was new and the enforcement was thin. Kincaid said he had spotted something on the north wall of the canyon, about 2,000 feet above the river. A discoloration in the rock, a line that did not match the surrounding stone. He climbed up. What he found when he reached the line was a cave entrance cut into the cliff face. The entrance had steps. The steps had been carved into the solid rock by human hands. They were worn smooth. They had been used. They led up from the level of the cliff face and disappeared into the dark interior of the rock. Kincaid went in. The article describes what he saw in detail. The cave was not a cave. It was a tunnel. The tunnel ran several hundred feet straight back into the cliff face and then branched. The branches branched. Within 1,000 feet of the entrance, Kincaid was inside a complex of hundreds of chambers, all of them carved into the living rock, all of them connected by passages cut at right angles to one another. He found rooms that looked like barracks. He found rooms that looked like granaries. He found rooms that looked like metalworking shops, with the residue of forge work still visible on the stone. He found a chamber the article described as the Cross Hall, several hundred feet long, with a seated stone idol in the center. The idol held a lotus flower in each hand. The pose, the article said, resembled Buddhist statuary the explorer had seen in books. He found stone tablets engraved with hieroglyphics he could not read. He found tools, copper tools, bronze tools, tools made of a grey metal the explorer could not identify, which he wrote resembled platinum. He found small yellow stones, polished and pierced, which the article called cat's eyes, and in the deepest chambers, laid out in rows, in burial formation, he found the bodies, mummified, wrapped in fabric the dry air of the cave had preserved. Male, the article said, adult, posed with their hands across their chests. Kincaid reported the find to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. The Smithsonian, according to the article, financed a follow-up expedition, a team of approximately 40 scientists, researchers, and laborers, under the direction of Professor S.A. Jordan, arrived in the canyon to continue the work. Artifacts were boxed and shipped east. Notes were taken. Drawings were made. Hypotheses were proposed. The article said the team had concluded that the civilization which had built the underground complex was, in the words of the Gazette, of Oriental origin, possibly from Egypt, tracing back to Ramses. That is what the article said. The Arizona Gazette ran no follow-up. There was no further reporting. No other newspaper picked up the story. No academic journal published anything about it. No book was written. No museum announced an exhibit. The artifacts, if they ever existed, were never seen by the public. And the Smithsonian, when asked decades later, said it had no record of any of it.
That article ran on the front page of a real newspaper, on a date you can verify, in a city you can drive to. The Smithsonian's denial is the easy part of this case. What their denial doesn't say, what it carefully avoids saying, is where we go next.
The Smithsonian's official position has been consistent since the early 2000s, when public inquiries started arriving in volume. The institution's Department of Anthropology has searched its files repeatedly and has not been able to find any mention of a Professor Jordan, of a G.E. Kincaid, or of a Grand Canyon excavation matching the Gazette's description. The institution categorizes the story as a recurring myth, returned to the public conversation by fringe authors and refusing to die. The institution also points out fairly that the article calls them the Smithsonian Institute. The actual name is the Smithsonian Institution. An employee would not get that wrong. That is the loud part of the denial. The quiet part is harder to talk about because the names in the article were not invented from nothing. In 1909, the Smithsonian had on its rolls, or close enough to its rolls, that the distinction had to be drawn carefully later. A naturalist named David Starr Jordan. Jordan was a real man. You can look him up. There is a Wikipedia entry for him. There is a Stanford University biography for him. He has a published autobiography titled The Days of a Man, which came out in 1922 and which sits in the public domain on Internet Archive tonight, if you want to read it. He was born in 1851 in Gainesville, New York. He was educated at Cornell, then at Indiana University, where he eventually became president. In 1891, he was selected as the founding president of Stanford University, a job he held for 22 years. He was a national figure. He served on federal commissions. He gave commencement addresses at the major universities of the Eastern Seaboard. He published over 2,000 pieces of scientific writing across his career. His specialty was ichthyology, the study of fish, and from the early 1880s until the year of his death in 1931, he was affiliated with the Smithsonian Institution, not as a salaried employee, as a research collaborator. He named species under the Smithsonian's taxonomic authority. He published in their bulletins. He led expeditions under their auspices. He was a fixture of the institution's scientific network for almost 50 years. In 1898, 11 years before the Arizona Gazette article, David Starr Jordan led an expedition down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. The expedition was scientific. It was funded in part by the Smithsonian. It was reported in the institution's publications. The expedition's stated purpose was the documentation of fish species native to the Colorado River system. That expedition is documented in Jordan's autobiography. He spent weeks on the river. He camped in the canyon. He photographed the walls. In 1906, 3 years before the Arizona Gazette article, the Smithsonian Institution offered David Starr Jordan its top job, the position of secretary, the chief executive of the institution, the man who would have sat at the desk and decided what the Smithsonian was for the next decade and a half. Jordan turned it down. He stayed at Stanford. But in April of 1909, when the Arizona Gazette ran a story naming a Smithsonian professor Jordan as the supervisor of a Grand Canyon archaeological expedition, the man who had nearly become the chief executive of the institution, the man who had personally led a Smithsonian-funded expedition through that exact canyon a decade earlier, was still very much alive, still very much affiliated with the institution, and still very much in the public eye. His name was David S. Jordan. The article's name was S. A. Jordan, 2 initials apart, now Kincaid. The Arizona Gazette article identifies the lead explorer as G. E. Kincaid, sometimes spelled Kincaid. A 30-year veteran of the Smithsonian Institute, the article said, an experienced field man, a prospector by training, an archaeologist by collaboration. The Smithsonian's official denial is technically accurate. There is no G. E. Kincaid in their files. There is, however, a Trevor Kincaid. Trevor Kincaid was born in 1872 in Peterborough, Ontario. He moved with his family to the Pacific Northwest as a child. He took his degree from the University of Washington in Seattle, where he became a professor of zoology and eventually the chairman of the department. He was a serious scientist. He published. He taught. He served as a special agent for the United States Department of Agriculture, doing field work across the western United States and into Alaska. In 1899, 10 years before the Arizona Gazette article, Trevor Kincaid was selected as a member of the Harriman, Alaska expedition. The Harriman expedition was one of the most significant scientific gatherings of the late 19th century. The financier Edward Harriman had personally chartered a steamship, fitted it out as a floating laboratory, and recruited 23 of the leading natural scientists in the United States to sail north and document the coast of Alaska. The expedition was supported by the Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian's leadership selected the scientists. The Smithsonian's bulletins published the resulting research. One of the scientists Edward Harriman invited aboard that ship in 1899 was Trevor Kincaid. Another was David Starr Jordan. The two men sailed together. They worked together. They catalogued species together. They are listed together in the published rosters of the expedition, which sit in the Smithsonian's archives today, fully accessible to anyone who wants to look. In the summer of 1908, Trevor Kincaid spent several months in Japan on a USDA assignment. He was studying agricultural pests. He returned to Seattle in the autumn. The Arizona Gazette article, when it ran on April 5, 1909, said that G.E. Kincaid had departed Green River, Wyoming, for his Grand Canyon expedition in October of 1908. The exact window Trevor Kincaid was confirmed to be back in the United States. Trevor Kincaid's USDA credential, authorizing his next federal assignment, is dated April 7, 1909, 2 days after the article.
The Smithsonian's denial is not a lie. There is no S.A. Jordan in their files. The denial is also not the truth. The men whose names sit on one initial of the article's names did exist, did work together, were both Smithsonian connected in 1909, and one of them was carrying a federal credential dated 2 days after the story ran.
There are two ways to read this. The first is that the Arizona Gazette ran a hoax. Slow News Week, Phoenix in April, the staff invented a tall tale to fill the front page. They borrowed names from real Smithsonian connected figures they had heard of in the regional press, made small modifications to provide deniability, and printed it. No follow-up was ever needed because no follow-up was ever planned. The story was a fabrication. The second reading is that the expedition was real. The names in the article were lightly modified to give the Smithsonian institutional deniability if anyone ever came looking. The artifacts were removed and absorbed into the institution's holdings under different catalogue numbers, or destroyed, or stored in a sub-collection that nobody has been able to access in 100 years. The Smithsonian's repeated official denial, "We have no record of S.A. Jordan or G.E. Kincaid," is technically accurate because those exact names appear in no file. The institution does not say it has no record of David Starr Jordan. The institution does not say it has no record of Trevor Kincaid. The institution says it has no record of S.A. Jordan and G.E. Kincaid. That distinction is the entire case. The Smithsonian could resolve the question in a single press release. They could publish the institution's expedition manifest for the years 1908 and 1909 with employee names and field assignments. They could publish their April 1909 shipping records from the Arizona Territory. They could publish the storage inventory of any cave excavation conducted in the American Southwest in that window. They have not done any of those things. In the absence of those records, the Hopi have been telling outsiders for centuries that there is something inside that canyon. They have been describing it in specific, geographic, and consistent terms. They have been telling people exactly where it is. They have been telling people what is in it. They have been telling people not to go there. The Hopi Reservation today is a 1.5 million acre tract of land in northeastern Arizona, surrounded entirely by the much larger Navajo Nation. The Hopi people have lived on the southern escarpments of Black Mesa for at least 900 years. Their oldest continuously inhabited village, Oribe, was established sometime around the year 1150 of the Common Era. That is 1,250 years before the United States existed. In Hopi cosmology, the world we are living in now is not the first world, it is the fourth. The third world ended. The Hopi tradition describes the destruction of that previous world in specific terms. The third world became corrupt. The people in it grew arrogant, broke the natural laws, fought among themselves. The creator deity Sotuknang made the decision to end it. The end came as flood and as upheaval and as the breaking of the surface of the earth. But before the destruction, the faithful were warned. Spider grandmother, called Kokyanguti in the Hopi language, came to the people who had remained true to the original instructions. She told them to seek refuge underground. She told them to climb down a reed or a vine into the earth. She told them they would be sheltered there during the destruction. They went underground, and the place they were taken to in Hopi tradition was called the Sipapulima, the Ant Kiva, a complex of underground chambers occupied by what the tradition calls the Ant People, who fed and sheltered the human refugees during the destruction of the world above. When the surface was safe again, the Ant People guided the human survivors back up through the rock, through a portal opening into the fourth world, the world we are living in now. That portal opening in Hopi tradition has a specific geographic location. It is in the Grand Canyon. It is on the Little Colorado River, approximately 4 miles upstream from the confluence with the main Colorado. It is a real, locatable geographic feature. It is a travertine dome and spring. It is called the Sipapu, the Hopi place of emergence, the hole in the world.
The Hopi have been telling outsiders about a complex of underground chambers beneath the Grand Canyon for at least 900 years. They have specified the geography. They have specified the name of the entrance. They have described what is inside. None of this is folklore I am inventing. This is the federal record in the Park Service materials, in published documents dating back to the 1890s.
The Hopi tradition describes the underground complex in some detail. There are chambers. The chambers were used by the Ant People. The Ant People are sometimes described as humanoid figures with elongated bodies and dark skin. They are not always described as supernatural. In some versions of the tradition, they are simply an earlier people who lived underground long before the Hopi arrived and who took the refugees in during the destruction of the Third World. The Zuni people, whose ancestral land sits east of the Hopi mesas, have a parallel emergence tradition. The Zuni describe humans passing through a series of 4 caves before emerging through the Sipapu into the present world. The two traditions converge on the same geographic location. The Hopi Salt Trail descends from the rim of the canyon to the Little Colorado River. It is a real trail. It has been used for an unknown number of centuries. It is in the historical record of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, in the field reports of the federal ethnographers who came through in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in the published photographs of the Smithsonian's own ethnological surveys. The Salt Trail's purpose is partly practical. The Hopi descend to harvest salt deposits in the canyon walls. The trail has been a source of dietary salt for the Hopi mesas for as long as anyone has been keeping records. But the trail's purpose is also ceremonial. It is a journey to the realm of the dead. The Hopi tradition specifies that the spirits of the deceased return after physical death to the underworld through the Sipapu. The Salt Trail passes near a location called Maski, the Skeleton House. The Skeleton House is the residence of Masau, the Hopi deity who is the guardian of the underworld, the keeper of fire, and the lord of the dead. To walk the Salt Trail is, in the Hopi religious understanding, to walk into the country of the dead and back out again. The Hopi who make the journey are reported in the ethnographic record as describing the experience consistently. The temperature changes near the sipapu. The air feels different. The light shifts. Some of them have described seeing figures in the canyon walls near the skeleton house, figures that do not move when the wind moves the brush, figures that are not there when the Hopi look again. These accounts have been recorded in writing by federal ethnographers since the late 1800s. They sit in the Smithsonian's own Bureau of American Ethnology publications. They are not secret. They are not suppressed. They are in the institution's own published record, available for anyone to read. The Hopi knew about the underground chambers before any white man went looking, and the location of the underground chambers in Hopi tradition sits in the same upstream eastern portion of the Grand Canyon that the Arizona Gazette article described in April of 1909. The article placed Kincaid's cave 42 miles upstream of El Tavar. El Tavar sits on the south rim at approximately River Mile 89. 42 miles upstream of that is somewhere around River Mile 47. That places the article's cave inside Marble Canyon, the eastern arm of the Grand Canyon system, in the same broad zone as the confluence of the Little Colorado. Same canyon, same direction, same upstream country. The article said the cave was on the north wall. The Hopi Sipapu is on the eastern bank of the Little Colorado, which runs roughly northwest to southeast through that part of the canyon. The geographies do not match exactly. They are close enough that a person with a topographic map of the area and a finger to trace it with would have to work to keep them apart. And the access to that part of the canyon, the access to the Sipapu, to the Salt Trail, to the Skeleton House, to the upstream zone where the Hopi tradition places the underground country, and where the Arizona Gazette article placed the cave, is restricted.
The United States Park Service prohibits public visitation to the Hopi salt mines. The trail is closed to general access. The only allowed visits are by initiated members of the Hopi religious societies. Those restrictions are current. You can pull them off the Federal Register tonight.
Those restrictions did not exist in 1909, when Kincaid said he made his discovery. The Grand Canyon was a national monument by then, declared by Theodore Roosevelt the previous year, but the protections were thin and the rangers were few. A man with a small boat could travel down the Colorado alone and climb up the north wall and walk into a cave entrance and report what he found, and no federal agency in 1909 had the manpower to either confirm his story or stop him. Those restrictions exist now. Since the establishment of the Grand Canyon National Park in 1919 and the elaboration of access controls across the 20th century, the area of the canyon where the Sipapu sits has been progressively closed to public visitation. The Park Service cites archaeological protection. The Park Service cites sacred site protection at the request of the Hopi and Navajo tribes whose land borders the area. The Park Service does not cite specific archaeological discoveries that the closures are designed to protect. There is no published Park Service inventory of what is inside the closed area. There is no published list of archaeological sites in the upstream Marble Canyon region that would explain the breadth of the access restrictions. The restrictions are simply in place, and the Hopi, in their tradition, have always said that what is in there should not be disturbed, that the ant people kept the entrance, that the dead passed through it, that the skeleton house sits at its edge. Whatever was in the cave, Kincaid said he found in 1909. The Park Service has spent the last 107 years making sure nobody else can climb up to look. Let me lay the dates out. 1882. The United States Geological Survey, under the direction of Major Clarence Dutton, completes a topographic survey of the north side of the Grand Canyon. Dutton names the major rock formations of the North Wall for figures from world religions: Isis Temple, Osiris Temple, Tower of Set, Tower of Ra, Cheops Pyramid, Buddha Temple, Buddha Cloister, Shiva Temple, Manu Temple. The names are on the federal maps. They have been on the federal maps for 144 years. They are still on the federal maps today. If you open a Park Service hiking map of the North Rim tonight, you can read them. 1898, David Starr Jordan, with Smithsonian funding, leads an expedition down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. 1899, Jordan and Trevor Kincaid sailed together on the Smithsonian-supported Harriman, Alaska expedition. 1906, the Smithsonian offers David Starr Jordan the position of secretary, the institution's top job. April 5, 1909, the Arizona Gazette publishes a front-page story describing a Smithsonian-funded archaeological expedition inside the north wall of the Grand Canyon, naming Professor S.A. Jordan as the supervising scientist and G.E. Kincaid as the lead explorer. April 7, 1909, Trevor Kincaid's USDA federal credential authorizing his next assignment is signed. 1919, the Grand Canyon National Park is established by federal act. Sometime in the years that follow, the Park Service begins restricting public access to the upper reaches of Marble Canyon, including the area around the Hopi, Sipapu, and the Salt Trail. The restrictions are still in effect. The Smithsonian's official position remains that no S.A. Jordan and no G.E. Kincaid ever worked for the institution. The institution has never been asked in a way that required an answer whether David Starr Jordan or Trevor Kincaid conducted any field work in the Arizona Territory in the period October 1908 to April 1909.
I've covered a lot of cases on this channel. I'll tell you straight, this is the one that bothers me. Not because I know what was inside the cave, I do not, but because every place where the institution had a chance to say more than it had, the institution said less.
The Hopi tradition predates the article. The article predates the Smithsonian's denial. The Smithsonian's denial predates the federal access restrictions in their current form. Every layer of silence has been built on top of an earlier layer of testimony. Somewhere in the upstream country of Marble Canyon on the North Wall, 2,200 feet above the river, there is either a cave entrance carved with steps that nobody has been able to find for 117 years, or there is no such cave and there never was. Somewhere in the Smithsonian's storage facilities in Suitland, Maryland, there are either crates of artifacts catalogued under names that don't appear in the public-facing inventory, or there is nothing of the kind, and there never has been. The Hopi say there is something down there. They have been saying it for 900 years. They are still saying it, and the Park Service still won't let anybody go look.
If you made it this far, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I read all of them. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.